Hello, and welcome to ESG with Liliana Locke. Let me start with something that might sound familiar. Most organizations think they know where their ESG risks are. They can list carbon emissions, sustainability goals, and they can point to a policy, a pledge, or a slide deck. And yet, when something actually goes wrong, it's rarely one of those headline issues. It's usually something more operational, something that nobody thought was risky until suddenly it was. Today, I want to talk about the ESG risks everyone talks about and the ones that actually cause damage. Before we get into it, just a quick introduction. I'm Liliana Locke. I help leaders and financial institutions understand their real ESG risks. I've worked with over 300 businesses worldwide to turn uncertainty into defensible decisions. And the reason I'm starting with this podcast topic is simple. It's because most ESG risk exposure does not come from the areas that get most airtime. Today, I want to talk about where ESG risk actually lives within inside organizations and why so many teams feel blindsided when issues surface. This isn't about blaming anybody. This is just about bringing clarity to ESG risks and the world that we operate in. When people talk about ESG risk, a few things come up again and again. Carbon emissions, of course, net zero targets, environmental impact, and high-level sustainability commitments. These are really important. They matter, of course, and they deserve attention, but they are also the most visible. These are discussed publicly and tracked at a high level and often owned by a function or a team. And because of that visibility, they tend to feel safer. Not necessarily because the risk is low, but because everyone knows they exist. But let's talk about the risks that maybe don't get enough attention and they also create problems. In my experience, real ESG damage usually comes from gaps rather than goals. So these include gaps in governance, gaps in data, gaps in ownership and responsibility, basically gaps between what is written in a policy or a strategy and what is actually happening in the organization. Let me give you a few examples I see. A supplier questionnaire arrives and no one can confidently answer all the parts of it. A procurement requirement changes and the organization scrambles to respond. A board member asks for evidence, not reassurance, and the evidence is scattered across the organization. Nobody owns it, and it takes a long time to gather it and make it actually credible. A policy exists, but no one knows how it is implemented or monitored, and it hasn't been documented. The monitoring hasn't been documented in ages. Data has been collected, but not in a way that truly stands up to outside scrutiny. None of these sound very dramatic on their own, but each one of them creates exposure, and importantly, each one usually lands on a person and not a system that's in place. So why do these risks get missed? There are a few reasons. First, ESG is often treated as a theme rather than a risk category. Secondly, responsibility is often spread out over a number of individuals. Everybody touches it, but nobody truly owns it fully. Third, the organization probably focuses on intent rather than defensibility. What is your target rather than how are you doing against that target? Fourth, and probably the one that we're all most familiar with, is that time and resources are stretched, and ESG risk is layered on top of existing roles. This isn't about competence or blame. This is just about how things tend to be structured in organizations. And so this is when ESG risk actually becomes a real potential issue for the organization. This is when somebody asks a specific question like, can you show this? Or who owns that? Or how do we know this is working? Or what happens if this fails? And this is when gaps turn into exposure that is visible in the organization. So to prepare and protect against this, leaders and organizations actually don't need more ESG activity. They just need clarity. To me, clarity is really at the heart of ESG risk. Clarity is about knowing which risks actually matter and what the implication is of those risks to the business. Clarity around where responsibility sits, who owns it, and what the process is. Clarity around decision making and how decisions were taken, clarity around the approach that was taken to manage it and be able to defend that management style or management approach and be able to question it and improve it. So it's not about perfection. It's not about having the most perfect organization. It's about setting up structures that allow you to generate clarity around these issues, and that allows you to truly manage ESG risks. So if you take any one thing from this episode, I hope that it is that ESG risk isn't just about your top line commitments and your most visible and familiar carbon targets. It's about everything that you can stand behind, everything operational and actually kind of boring, I suppose, but it's not flashy. This is the structure and the process. This is the stuff that doesn't really make it into a sustainability report, but it is absolutely crucial in order to have positive results in your sustainability report. These are the areas that really deserve attention, that need to be communicated to top line leaders, to the chief executives, and the areas that we're going to dive into in these podcasts. In the next episode, we're going to talk about why ESG feels so vague in many organizations and how that vagueness itself creates risk. If this episode is valuable to you, hit the subscribe button. And if you know a colleague who's trying to make better risk decisions, then share this with them.